Where do we go from here? Because we seem to be almost sort of caught in a sort of a whirlpool, right? We just keep going round and round in the same space. Dr. Dev? No, but surely, I mean, you at some point mentioned public-private partnership. Is that really the way forward? Is that the sole way forward?
No, this is not a question of in the electricity sector. There is no need for public-private partnership. In fact, the private sector can play the role. Question is that whether distribution will be handed over to private. No, that cannot happen. Also, it is not possible to have a parallel licensing. Because parallel licensee under the law, because as I said, under the regulation, there are certain responsibilities cast on any licensee. So there is a universal service obligation. So he has to have a proper network, or he has to have a rollout plan. Then only he will be allowed. And if he were to use other wires, Supreme Court in Mumbai case has very clearly said the surcharge will have to be paid. Cross-subsidy surcharge, what will be worked out. So that being the case, how can the consumer exercise that choice? So we are again coming back to this, that when we have a single buyer model, you run into these problems. So if your generation capacity comes, transmission is not going to be such a problem, there will be difficulty. But suppose a lot of the power can start flowing as an interstate on just the national power grid. Then what happens? Some of the major consumers start switching over. Then the real pressure comes on the state government, who decide, like we know there are left party controlled states who have debated in their assemblies and decided that it is better to not supply electricity for few hours to their consumers and sell that electricity in the national market. That way electricity becomes cheaper because that money can be used.
Yep.
Now if you see the standard of performance that has been prescribed by the regulator, you cannot do that. Only in case of shortage, you can have a load shedding. Otherwise, but then this is the way, because I also know of a state like Tripura, where they had to do this, otherwise they won't be able to pay the salaries of their employees of the state utility. So this is again, when we talk of the public interest, that's how it is interpreted.
In fact, I would like to just add one last point here, that I see a section 11Z coming, which is going to be that power will be allowed to flow out, but no power will be allowed to flow in, because when the distribution companies realize cheaper power is coming from Orissa and other eastern states, which is far cheaper to produce power, they have to protect their customers. So they're going to run to government and say, "Sir, don't allow outside power to come in." It's going to be the reverse.
That's an inevitable sort of a scenario.
Absolutely.
No, but in all of this, the larger question of, I mean, you mentioned about ways to try and sort of trim some of the supply gaps, but the supply gaps in some parts of the country are pretty huge. So it comes back to that whole issue of, fresh investment. How do you, I mean, it's a chicken and egg situation. How do you encourage some of this private investment to carry on flowing in, go from a 40% figure to, let's say, 60 or 65% figure in the coming years, without, having this fear hanging on over their heads that, all right, tomorrow they might pull the plug on us, literally?
No, but there must be in the audience some who are investing in power projects. We should ask that question.
Absolutely. The word is greed.
The word is greed. You've been watching all of this sort of, a fairly neutral party here, let's say. So let's understand from you, I mean, this balance that we are trying to say, how do you strike this balance? What would your recommendation be?
No, actually, if you take a country like Sri Lanka, where I come from, now we expect an economic growth of about 8-9% over the next few years, more than that even, and which imposes heavy burden or heavy pressure on the infrastructure requirements such as electricity and water. So now the government has an issue, because though the government has been investing in these sectors over the past few decades, whether government is capable of investing the total requirements of these sectors is an issue, because government also has to look into health sector, education, all those sectors. So my understanding is that this huge investment requirements, the government may not be able to come up with in the short run or even the long run. So whether we like or not, if we are to go through this economic development which we are envisaging, we need to encourage private capital into the sector.
Right.
So to attract the private capital, as Harry said, we need to provide an investment conducive environment where the government or the regulator should honor a level playing field and honor all the contracts and the decisions in the long run.
Should being the operative
Yeah.
word, right? I mean, should
Sure.
and would are two things.
Yeah.
But just your last thoughts. I mean, I'd like you all to sort of not just tell us, what should be done, because I think we all talk about that fairly often, but also what's likely to happen, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years. I'll start with you, Mr. Dhol.
I think regulators will get a new title of supermen, because they have to function in an environment which is unbelievable.
Doesn't always work though, right? I mean, in telecom, we've seen that. Sort of shaky.
Telecom is different. You see, telecom, you have to deal with one entity. That's the
Sure.
central government. Here you've got 32 plus entities, and all of them have their own points of view, and all of them don't speak the same language. So I think regulators are evolving. Thank God. They're getting more balanced. They're not getting swayed by one side or the other. And that's giving a lot of comfort to investors, particularly the private sector. Because they know that if the regulator would get swayed by a private sector chap, then a bigger fish will sway him more. But when he doesn't get swayed, that makes him happy. Second, the government tries to put a lot of pressure on regulators. And being ex-public servants, they tend to listen to government. And it's not their fault, because that's what they've been doing, rightly or wrongly, and that's how they performed for 40 years. So when the court listens to the executive, that this is in public interest, so do they. But I think now I'm finding that regulators are beginning to look at and understand the importance of getting private sector in. It's very simple. In one sentence, I could say they understand that if you don't create the environment, the investments are not going to come, and there's nothing left to regulate.
So it's inevitable that they
Yeah.
don't have a choice in many ways.
Yeah.
And the fact that the kind of regulator also, the role of the regulator is one thing, but also the kind of people who are getting involved there on that particular space. Dr. Dev, you agree that there should be perhaps a little bit more diversity, let's say, in the kind of people who are now getting onto the regulatory side?
Well, I think that's a very an issue which can be debated. But on the ridiculous salary which you are going to pay and the terms of conditions of service, do you think that anybody from the private sector is going to join? So you have a choice is limited. Either you are going to get retired bureaucrats or retired technocrats. That's the reality. But
So
if
that
you are
too needs to
asking me
change.
about what will be the picture in 5 years, 5 years I'm not that pessimistic, because as I said that the investment in generation by private will continue. Whatever may be the greed, or they are seasoned business person, entrepreneurs, they know that once their share becomes significant, they will be able to deal with the political economy of electricity. Because that's why I said that the things had to start happening at distribution level. It will not be your APDRP2 or APDRP3. It will be the simple reality is that if you want electricity to be delivered to your consumers, and there will be anyway elections coming there, no? So that's another fact.
Well, all right. So a little bit of reality check there, and also, of course, a fair amount of optimism as well that we've gotten out of our speakers today as to where we go from here. Gentlemen, thank you so much for expressing your views, joining this discussion, and thanks again.